Hi, hello, my name is Savannah. If you are new here, just before I get into this, I wanted to give a little rundown on who I am. I'm a Canadian student studying at Minerva, which is a non-traditional university where we move to a new city around the world every semester. And so far I've lived in San Francisco, Seoul, Berlin, and currently living in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Today I wanted to consolidate lots of personal finance and budgeting resources to provide you with one holistic video that outlines lots of tips and tricks. It can be really challenging as a student to manage money. We just gained all this independence and there's just so many things on our plate. While the freedom can be really exciting, it can also be super overwhelming, so I wanted to do my best to support you all. So in today's video, I'm going to outline 12 tips to help you better budget. My first tip is to use a budgeting template. So what is a budgeting template? It is a customizable worksheet that helps you manage your finances by tracking all of your living expenses. It's a great way to visualize your spendings and understand where your money is going. With this worksheet, you can reflect on your purchases and make better decisions as to where your money is spent. So actually in the description, I've linked a budgeting template that I've designed. It's just obviously very time consuming to create in the first place, and so that can be a good foundation. So if you scroll down to the description of my video, you can click on the spreadsheet I've linked and it'll bring you to this page. The first thing you'll want to do is to go up to File and then make a copy. And then once you've had your copy opened, you can duplicate the template sheet at the bottom left and then rename that tab to whatever month and year that you'll be working on. Then you can also change that information on the sheet. So for income, I'm gonna start by filling out some of the streams I've got. I'm not putting in any real information, so just keep that in mind. So if you're getting any gifts from family members or whatever it might be, you can add that in too. Alright, so for subscriptions, there's Spotify, Netflix. I also have a Canva subscription and a Dropbox subscription, and you'll see for Dropbox I write down the yearly price that I pay and I divide that by 12. And the reason it's 12 is because there are 12 months in the year. So you'll see over here, it'll automatically populate into your total spendings. And I also wanted to show you at the end, on the far right, there's a lending and borrowing tracker, and so you can put in someone's name, whether you lent or borrowed from them, how much, the date you did, and then whether or not you've fulfilled the transaction. You'll also see over here in the middle that there is a question. So how much do you want to save this month? And that's completely up to you, but it'll give you how much you can spend in a week. So your weekly budget. And obviously you can change this every month. Over here, I'm just filling in so I can show you how the sheet works. And you'll see at the bottom that the red means that I've gone over my weekly budget versus the green is below. So see, it's automatically populated. Then you can grab all of that, insert a chart, and it'll give you a pie chart. Pie chart is great because you can really visualize how you're spending your money. Throughout the day, you can write down all of your expenses, and then at the end of every day, you can go back to your sheet and fill it in. For me, this has been the best way to make sure I'm constantly updating it. When you're out and spending money, you're usually not near your computer where you can update it right away, so having that in my phone and just labeling which day I'm spending. So if I do miss a couple days, I can go back and add it into the right section. And since specifically where I'm located right now is Argentina and we're cash based, you can use the cash envelope method. So for this, you can do it in a few ways. The first is to assign an envelope to a category. So for instance, you'll see that in the sheet there's groceries, and then there's also health and wellness, drinks, coffee. That way, when you're spending money, you know that you have what is limited to the envelope to spend. You can also do this weekly. So you'd have 4 envelopes per month. You put in the amount of money that you've designated for that month, and you're limited to just spending what is in that envelope on that specific week. Now, if you're not in Argentina, but you still want to deal with physical budgeting, you can definitely do this. You just have to cash out the money you want to spend that month, and then essentially the same thing. You would just divide it into your envelopes. For me personally, when I was coming to Argentina, I designated an envelope for tattoos because I knew that that was something I wanted to spend my money on. And so I had that envelope to spend. I wasn't going to spend more than what was in there, and that is exactly what I did. Now, at the end of every month, it's so important that you take time to actually reflect. Look to see how much you're spending every week, see if it's consistent or not. You should also look at every category and see whether you can cut back in certain places or if you're being a little bit too stingy in others. Now the next category of tips I have is food. And since this is the largest category of tips I have, I've divided it into a few sections. For the sake of making it simpler, we're gonna label these in letters. So tip A is to price compare. Now I'm sure you've realized that name brands versus off brands tend to have different prices. Oftentimes in lots of stores, the brand that's designated to that specific store will be cheaper. So for instance, Carrefour has the Carrefour brand. Those crackers will be cheaper than the ones from a more well-known name brand. As tempting as it might be to purchase the one that's familiar, it's usually more expensive. And so buying the off-brand will save you a little bit of money. Even if it's just a few pennies, it adds up. It's also important to determine which grocery stores are the cheapest near you. So for instance, where I'm living in Argentina, we're in a bit of a more expensive neighborhood. And so if I really wanted to, I could go to a grocery store a little bit farther away that I know is in a bit of a cheaper neighborhood and get my groceries there. But also even within my neighborhood, I know there's more expensive places. So for instance, Dia is the cheapest grocery store. With that being said, the main grocery stores might not have everything that you want. For me in particular, I know that I have some items that are only found in specialty stores. And so for instance, I look for tofu. Even from within the first few weeks of living here, I found out that the tofu in a place like Verdura is 300 pesos more expensive than the tofu in this other grocery store. I do not know the name, so I'll include it on the screen. 300 pesos, which is about $1. Again, might not seem like a lot, but it does add up, especially considering that this is food that you're repurchasing quite often. Also, when it comes to fresh fruits and vegetables, I would say that the grocery stores, especially in Argentina, don't really have the best, but the little corner markets do. So for instance, Lucas, which is very near to our residence hall, has cheaper vegetables and fruits, and they're honestly better quality. So it's good to know where to go to get the cheapest items. So what you can do is do your main shop at the cheaper grocery store and then do all the little extras separately on different days, but you know where to go when you're looking for a specific item. Also, I wanted to note that it's really normal to spend more in the first few weeks when you move to a city. And I know this is very specific to Minerva students, but you're setting up, you're purchasing all of the basic condiments and the things that you might only need to spend on once, and so just keep that in mind and don't be too hard on yourself. And this sort of ties into my next point, so point B, which is to make a rough list. The way I've done my groceries is to always have a list with everything, and then I break it down into where I find those items for cheaper. And so that way I know if I'm walking by this one location, I can grab all of those things. And then if I go on a different day somewhere else, I know that that's nearby as well. And so instead of doing it all in one go or have to end up going to, 10 different places, I keep in mind that if I'm ever nearby, those things are cheaper over there, so I'll buy them. In terms of making a list, it can be really helpful to have a couple rough ideas of the things you want to make that week. That way you're not wasting any food as well. I think when you have a few meals in mind, it's a lot easier to shop specifically for what you want to eat rather than buying things that you might not end up eating on time or knowing how to use. So usually when I go out, I have maybe 3 to 5 ideas, and then I go to wherever I need to be and I look to see what's on sale. And then that kind of determines which maybe 2 or 3 I end up picking for the week. Obviously I don't want to go with no ideas of what I want to buy, but at the same time, if something's on sale, I want to make the most of that discount. My next tip is to shop less frequently. It's better to go on one larger shop than lots of little ones. I would say I go about once a week, and that's perfect for me. The thing is, when you do go every couple of days, you end up buying a few little things just because you're tempted, you're there. And so when you go on one larger shop, you're not getting as many little things, but also you're so focused on getting your larger quantities of food, you don't have as much space to be grabbing those little extras, because those costs can really add up. In terms of also shopping out, I just wanted to mention, don't shop while you're hungry. You end up buying so much more stuff. So tip D is to consider alternative ways to consume the same foods. So for instance, in Argentina, you can get a can of beans, which is about 200 grams, and it's 150 pesos, which is half $1. So not a crazy amount, but still, it is really not a lot of food. I just found my little example can. This is how big the cans are. These are lentils, but there you go. On the other hand, you can get 500 grams of dried beans, which is a lot of beans. That ends up being about 1,500 grams of beans cooked. So clearly lots more, and you only get that for 250 pesos. So it's a bag, much bigger. and you save a lot more, because although the can is not expensive, you have to buy that can 7.5 times approximately to get as much food as you did for that bag of dried beans. So just consider that when you're buying things. There's an alternative way to buy it where you can just do a little bit more work, but you'll get it for a lot cheaper. I think it's worth it. Tip E ties into my previous point, and that is to freeze things. Obviously, since you're making maybe a lot more food, if you're buying things like dried beans, it's really helpful to just freeze those extra portions for another day. It saves you time in the long run because you have to keep cooking them in smaller batches. And honestly, freezing is underrated. And so for instance, I always freeze my bread. I buy a loaf and I pretty much immediately put it in the freezer because I know all I need to do is toast it. It's perfect, it'll last way longer, and it's cheaper. Then in the first few weeks, I tend to purchase a few more things that are in plastic containers, and I save those containers as Tupperware for future use. Saving these plastic containers is not only sustainable, but it's very cost effective. And so when I make something, whether it's an actual meal like a soup or chili or whatever it might be, I can either freeze a portion of that I can use for the future, or if it's a specific ingredient, I can also do the same. Tip F within the food category is to bring food with you. When you go into a cafe or when you're going to a library, I know it's easier to just bring a little bit of extra cash and buy a meal when you're out, but you will save a lot of money just bringing a lunch and even bringing snacks. And then my final tip within the food category, organize cooking groups. So a cooking group is an arrangement that you have between a group of friends, maybe roommates, where you're each assigned a day of the week or a meal to cook. You have to cook a large enough portion to feed everybody in your cooking group. And then on the other days, you eat the food that the other members of your group have cooked. If you don't love cooking, this can be a really great way to reduce your time in the kitchen, but also ends up being a lot cheaper because, as mentioned before, bulk foods tend to be on the lower end, and so by cooking one larger meal, you can use up everything that you purchase in one go, and then the rest of the days of the week you're not spending on food. All right, so now that we're out of the food category, we're gonna get into gift giving. Obviously, generosity is so great, but if you know that you're someone who really likes to give gifts, make sure you've allocated part of your budget to spending on gift giving. Tip number 4 is lending and borrowing. So it's really important that you're not afraid of asking for the money that people owe you. Everyone is struggling in their own way and people will understand. It's your money anyways. Also, I want to note within this category that it's really important that when you have roommates, you're having discussions about how you're going to split the room expenses. A great way to do this is with apps like Splitwise. It's essentially an application where you can write down any expenses that were made between friends, and it'll split the money however you assign it to be split. That way it also keeps them a little bit more accountable because they have the amount that they owe you on their phones readily available. But overall, just make it a priority at the start of the rooming arrangement to discuss how you're going to split the cleaning supply expenses and the toilet paper, whatever it might be. It's really great to have those conversations at the very beginning. Tip number 5 is related to nights out. If you like to go out and go clubbing, drinks can get very expensive. If your objective is to have a night of drinking, purchase alcohol at the supermarket beforehand, aka pre-game. At the very least, you'll just buy one cocktail or a drink at the bar. Also, don't take your card. When you're under the influence, you're more likely to make some stupid spendings that you'll regret later. If you don't have a card, you don't have any money to spend. And also in Argentina, you really don't want to be using your card. The exchange rate is awful, so don't even have it with you. Tip number 6 is how to socialize for free. Not all social interactions have to involve spending. You don't have to go out to get boba, you don't need to go out for a meal. You can just hang out in res, go for a walk, paint in a park, play a board game. There's so much you can do, you just have to get a little bit creative about it. Tip number 7, student ID. Make use of your student card while you're a student. There are lots of opportunities to use your student card to get good discounts or benefits. You just have to ask, even if they don't advertise for it. Most often, I've seen student cards save a lot on flights. There's a lot of student programs on airlines. Recently, I signed up for Qatar Airways because I realized that one of the flights I was going to take was through them. So instead of purchasing through another provider, I went straight to them and I signed up for a student program and I immediately got a 10% discount. This is also super useful for national parks. Typically the price is a lot cheaper for a student, and also really helpful for museums. Now this will vary depending on where you are, but I know in Canada, for instance, there are lots of cafes that will also give you a little bit of a discount with a student card. Now we're on to tip number 8, which is transportation. If you can, walk. It seems obvious, but it's free. It's also good exercise and it's a nice way to explore. I would advise pre-downloading some music and a nice podcast for the occasion. I think it's also a really great way to just relax and reset a little bit. I've always really enjoyed walking places, and I think it's a really nice way to just take a break from everything that's going on in your life. Now the next cheapest way is usually taking a bus or a subway, metro, whatever's available in the city you're in. In Buenos Aires, the buses are pretty cheap, but I also did want to mention that in Argentina, it's just generally not safe to be out alone at night, or even just out at night, regardless of whether you're alone or not. So if it is a matter of safety, please take a cab. Obviously, it might be a little bit more expensive, but it's worth spending a little bit more on something that will potentially save you. And if you are taking cabs, I would recommend downloading all of the available cab apps in your city. And so for Argentina, there's Cabify, Didi, and Uber. And then on that day where you're trying to find a cab, just compare the prices, because there are a lot of things that vary those costs. And if you can, split a ride with friends. But in general, I would say just try to consider when the sunset is happening and how long it'll take you to get back to res. We're so lucky in Argentina that the sunset's really, really late, so you have quite a bit of time to figure out how to get home. Tip number 9 is don't spend what you don't have. Spending money that you haven't already earned is a really, really bad mindset. Until that money is in your bank account, you shouldn't be touching it. This is especially important if you have a credit card. Tip number 10 is little purchases. The seemingly little things like coffee or ordering food, they're very tempting and they can seem like small purchases, but they do add up. So it's really important to assess your priorities. If coffee brings you a lot of joy, that's great, but maybe go twice a week instead of every day. Also, if you are getting coffee, I'd recommend looking for a local, smaller cafe. Those tend to be cheaper than the multinational chains. Also, if you're someone who goes to cafes to work, I'd recommend looking for local libraries, as those are typically free. But honestly, I'd urge you to consider what big purchases you want to make. Not purchasing coffee every morning can lead to saving for a passion of yours, like buying a new camera, a new set of headphones, a short trip to a nearby city. By spending on little things for immediate reward, you might be taking away from something bigger that you might enjoy even more in the future. Tip number 11 is clothing. Don't buy fast fashion. The prices can appear cheaper up front, but the quality is lower and you tend to buy things you don't need just because they're less expensive. This also relates really closely to sales. Don't buy things that are on sale. Buy things that you want when they go on sale. I think it's super easy to fall into the habit of seeing a really good price and just thinking, great, this is an amazing opportunity. But do you actually want this and do you actually need this? So what should you do? Swap your clothing with your friends. You should also go to thrift stores. In the US, ThredUp is great. If you haven't heard of it, it's the biggest online thrift store. You can search for exactly what you want and it's risk-free. If something isn't the way that you pictured it to be, the customer service is great. You can return it and get a refund. These methods are not only so much cheaper, but they're better for the planet. I'd also recommend that you give the clothes that you don't wear to the people in your life. Make it a culture to be mindful of what you own and designate a new owner when the item isn't used sufficiently. This will also encourage people in your life to do the same with you. And finally, tip number 12 is do not compare yourself. It's easy to see classmates and friends in your life spending a certain way, which makes it easier to justify your own spending. But take a step back and consider that they might be in a ton of debt or getting their money from a rich parent or elsewhere. Just focus on yourself and your goals. I hope this video has been helpful for some of you. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always leave them below. I will keep the video description updated to whatever new information I have, and I'll include any resources that I've mentioned in the video and more. I hope you've had a wonderful week, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!